The reason that we view commitment very negatively at times is because we believe on some level it's restricting our freedom.
It's like they want to commit, but they're kind of afraid of like making the wrong choice, or sometimes there's some underlying stuff about not being good enough.
When I, as a man, have too many choices, I can do what I want, when I want, who I want, wherever I want. That is not freedom.
Especially if a man starts to go on that journey of like opening up and seeing that he wants something a bit deeper, but he keeps kind of hitting the roadblocks.
Commitment actually amplifies my freedom.
It's almost like we are setting ourselves up for failure. Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast, if I can say the name of my podcast right. And today I have a wonderful episode that just like the time just flew, you know. Usually I record this intro straight after the episode, so it's fresh in my mind. So I'm talking about what's really relevant. And it just flew by, you know, an hour and a bit just flew by. And we really talked about how men can thrive in relationship, but in particularly really getting into the commitment fears that men have. Why do men get afraid in commitment? What do they need to do to start learning how to be with commitment? We really get into that from both our experiences. Talk to Jeremie, who I know from Instagram, and really delve into vulnerability, like vulnerability versus emotional dumping, and why those two things are different and what's different about those things, and how we can create relationships or create an inner understanding of the difference, or stay tethered and grounded when we're in our vulnerability, because it's such an important part I'm seeing with the men that I work with, helping them be more vulnerable in their relationships and tackle their fears about emotional dumping and so forth. And we talk a lot about like indecision as well. Why is it that men get this indecision when they're in relationship, or they are going into a relationship and they're like, is this the right thing? Is this the wrong thing? I don't know. I'm afraid. I'm worried, and all these things. We actually dive into that for a substantial amount of the conversation to unpack that a little bit as well. Before we get into the episode, just to let you know, I'm running a program, a really short program for 5 weeks in Jan and February. It's going to be running from the 22nd of Jan. That's going to be a men's program about dating. I call it the Men's Dating Accelerator because I'm seeing a lot of men who want to transform and change how they date going into 2024. So I thought I'd put this lovely streamlined package together, a short course, a short program that's going to be run live. So it's going to be on Zoom live with me, and it'll probably be the only time I run this in this fashion. So if you're interested, the price is very reasonable. It's a very cheap price. The super early bird is £150. The price after that is £300. And if you're interested, the link to purchase and jump on the program is in the show notes. So there's no excuse. You don't need to contact me. You can just jump straight in, and then you'll start to get details about it in the new year. So if there's something you're interested in, just jump down there. But without further ado, I'll let you jump into the episode. So listeners, I'm excited to have a wonderful guest with me today, someone I've been following for a long time and who's been really inspirational, and I've loved his content and his beautiful writing, and just, you know, when you see another person, and also you see another brother as well, talking about relationships, talking about how we connect deeply is something that's quite rare, I think, in the world that we live in. And yeah, I'd love to introduce my wonderful guest, Jeremie Lotemo. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, David. Thank you so much for having me today, man. And I'm really, really excited for our conversation today, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the richness of where this conversation goes. Um, and this was kind of customary on my podcast. I like to always ask guests about what was their journey. You know, it's just to you, like, what was your journey to do the work that you now do today?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of what inspired me into the work that I'm doing now was really my own, what I would generalize as my issues with commitment and love. So for a long time, like it felt really scary for me to fully commit myself to something, like to be all in, to be 10 toes down, like whatever commitment and dedication feel like that for me, like was really dysregulating to my body. So that led me in my work life to explore different types of careers, but I would explore them no longer than a year or so. And that also translated to my love life. And that led me to be in relationships for no longer than 6 months. And I'm here looking around like, why are these relationships ending in 6 months? And I was the common denominator, of course. And so I got into a place in my life where I really hit what I would call like a rock bottom. And it was a result of me constantly neglecting my responsibilities, being too scared to commit to something fully. And so as a result of that, I really took that strong, um, that's tough lesson of, commit to something, dedicate yourself to it, see it all the way through, and don't waver. I really took that to heart and I started to invest in the things that I was passionate about. So at that time, I was passionate about marketing, I was passionate about graphic design, branding. And so I completely committed myself to that and gained certain skill sets, um, climbed the corporate ladder in the marketing world. And that also created a ripple effect in other areas of my life. Me being more committed, me showing up more dedicated, started to impact my love life as well. I started to maintain relationships with the people that I cared about. I started to nurture the relationships with the people that were already in my life. Um, and that led me to look at ways in which I could not only dedicate my skills to an agency or a company, but what are the things that I was really passionate about, like my heart's desires that I was also neglecting, that I was shying away from because of I was afraid of committing to it fully. And that brought me to my poetry. And so that is really what sparked a lot of the work that I do now was me sharing my poetry, self-publishing a poetry book, and then sharing my poems online. And then that led to my insights around relationships and intimacy, which created a community of people that wanted to continue to receive and hear that. But it all began with me wanting to create visibility for those parts of me that I often kind of reserved for my own solitude or for my community or my inner circles. And I realized, wait, here again is my fear of commitment. Here again is my fear of fully dedicating myself to something that I care about. Uh, and so that led me to the work that I'm doing. And I noticed, wait, I'm not alone in this. There's a lot of men also struggling with this. And there's a lot of things that hold us back from fully living our true potential, right? Not only in our work life, not only as men, but as partners, as lovers, as husbands, as fathers. And so as I started to examine those fears in myself, I started to share more about those fears. Um, and honored and fortunate to work with so many men and walk them through that process that I myself continuously go through as well. So, I mean, that would be in a nutshell, for sure, what has brought me to where I am now.
Mm, mm. is a story I know well, almost personally. It's funny as you were saying it, like, you were saying commitment to love and commitment to work. I was like, oh shit, I thought about this before, and I've kind of told this to my listeners, but I too had this experience of like never being in a relationship. As soon as it got to like a year, I'd be it's almost like I get to a year and be like, we've been together for a year. And somehow we conspired to have that relationship fall apart in some way.
Right.
For many years, I was an IT contractor. So I was uncommitted by trade. I was like
Wow.
software testing at different companies, and I could leave. I could leave in a week most of the time. And it's amazing how we can kind of construct a life that we think is working based on something we're trying to avoid or something we don't want or a fear or concern. And like to many people in the outside world, they look around and go, that's they're doing really well. Their life looks rosy and so forth to them from the outside.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I resonate with what you shared around the contract. After I left the marketing world, I did continue to be in the branding and the marketing space and the graphic design world, completely just as a contractor, taking up projects, 3-month projects, and things like that. And again, it's a safety net. It's my comfort zone, right? Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing, man.
Mm. And it's funny, one of the things I kind of had on my list today was to talk about commitment. So maybe we just jump straight into that, since it's something that we experience personally. And there's always a lot of talk about men and commitment. Right? There's a lot of talk of like men, you have the women standing on one side going, men don't want to commit, and men are, in a mixed bag on one side saying, we want to commit, and others going, but we want to commit to the right person. And I guess, or the right relationship, and it has to be exactly these ways, or I'm not sure when I want to commit. But I wondered for you, it's like, why do we, as men, I know we're not one homogenous group that all think the same, but why is it that we kind of view commitment so negatively?
Yeah, what I found in my experience, and there's something that I believe John Wineland, we spoke a little bit about him before we started recording, but one of the things that he talks about is like the masculine or men in general have this desire and this craving for like freedom, right? And individuality. Um, and I think at the core, there is that is at the root of a lot of our commitment issues and our relationship to being fully committed in love. And I think the reason that we view commitment very negatively at times is because we believe on some level it's restricting our freedom. And so when I believe love, me devoting myself to, let's say, one partner, right, or one job or one career or uh, whatever it may be that is inviting that level of devotion, commitment, and dedication, whatever that is, on some level, there's a part of me that I believe is very young or very, what I would say is junior or immature, believes that that is going to take away my freedom. And so what I found is commitment actually amplifies my freedom.
Mm.
Because when I, as a man, have too many choices, I can do what I want, when I want, who I want, wherever I want. That is not freedom. That's not freedom. I find freedom in having less choices. Like when I am able to discipline myself as a man to look at something and say, this is something that I want to commit myself fully to, right? Whether that is my poetry, whether that's to the woman that I love, being able to take all of my energy and direct it towards that one thing is a clear expression of my freedom. Because, like we're saying, I could do whatever I want. I could go here. I could go there. I could end this relationship. I could literally delete my online presence and just disappear into the woods, right? I could do that, right? And maybe there's a part of me that would love that, right? The masculine urge to disappear into the woods and never be heard from again, right? I could do that. But it's the fact that with the reality of that freedom existing and that possibility being open to me and available to me at all given moments, I'm choosing to express that freedom in this way, with this person, in this time and space, with this career, or with this decision. That is a clear expression of my freedom, right? So I think when we explore ways in which commitment is actually it's another coin of our freedom. It's the other coin of it, right?
Mm.
And I don't believe it restricts it, but I believe what I mentioned earlier, the reason that we see it as restricting often comes back to childhood experiences where our freedom was restricted. We were told to be one thing. We were told that we couldn't express the fullness of our humanity. We told that we could only express one emotion, or we were told what to do with our lives, right? We were handed a life to live. And maybe as men, we've bought into that life and we follow it and we realize that, wait, I'm not happy, I'm not fulfilled here. So, all of these experiences that happen early on where our freedom is restricted, we don't have the freedom and the space to feel safe in exploring what we want to be, who we want to be, and what life we want to create. I think it creates that resistance to commitment because then my capacity then to feel committed or to feel safe in commitment is often me trying to just break free from a relationship where I was suffocated. There's a younger part of me that's trying to break free from a
Mm.
relationship where my freedom felt suffocated. And so oftentimes the feminine, right, calling me in saying, I need your commitment, I need you to show up more fully. Sometimes if I'm not in touch with those younger parts of me, I'm viewing them through the lens of that person that in my life was restricting me in these ways. So everything that I'm hearing from them is being filtered through those experiences. So somebody's inviting my commitment, but how I hear it and internalize it is this person wants to box me in. They want
Mm.
to restrict me. They don't want the best for me. They want me to be this thing for them. And so sometimes that may be the case, but oftentimes it's not. And that requires us to get a very deep examination, a deep look at, wait, where did I really start to form this relationship with commitment? Because as I'm saying, for most people, I think all human beings, commitment amplifies our freedom. We find joy in fully committing and dedicating and devoting ourselves to something, right?
Mm.
You can even see that spiritually when it's a figure or a God or a creator. Like there's deep fulfillment in praying every day, connecting to that essence, um, devoting ourselves to that energy. There's deep fulfillment in that. So, what has happened for us to see this as something negative? And I think it's shaped by past experiences.
Mm. And I hear you say that, I'm thinking of my own experience, like as you said, like the feminine calling us. It's like I just think of like my mother. Like that's my first
Mhm.
experience of someone trying to get me to commit to something. And I see this in
Mhm.
like so many men that I work with. It's like they, they listen to their partners, their women, or the woman they're dating through the lens of their mother. It's like this woman's asked me for commitment. And as you said, it's trying to like box me in and restrict
Mhm.
my um capacity, restrict my choices, and
Mhm.
and they kind of fall into this childlike behavior, and they don't always realize it. It's often unconscious if they don't know that this is their pattern. They're conscious of like kind of like almost throwing a tantrum in the way that a child would. Right. This is why we do so much in a child work to see that this is a lot of our reactions to someone calling us to commitment, or in a sense of like dating and relationship. It's like a woman saying to you, "Hey, like we've been dating for a while. Like I really enjoy this.
Yeah.
Could we start to call this something serious?" And we hear that through the lens of like, oh shit, she's trying to trap me. She's trying to get me
Yeah.
into something here. She's trying to stop me
Mhm.
from being free. She's trying to stop me from living my life. And then we might, and I just talk from my own experience and some of the guys I've worked with recently, is like they then project onto that woman their past experiences of like or when I say past experiences, or their past perceived experiences of being with the feminine telling them what to do and not allowing them to do what they want.
Mm,
But in reality, that projection isn't necessarily a fair view of what's happened. Because I see
mm,
this, and you must see this if you're the men you work with as well, is like that projection of the feminine trying to control and trap them. A lot of that occurs from just purely the way they listen to what's being said. Like if their partner or the girl they're dating is like, "Oh, what are you up to tomorrow?" They're like, "Why do you want to know?
mm.
Why do you want to know what I'm up to tomorrow? I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow yet." You know, it's like this always on this idea of like you're trying to like restrict me, and just hearing everything through that lens. And I wonder if you'd speak to, because then the man becomes a bit more mature and he realizes that he has this fear of commitment. I see, and
Mhm,
he's like, I want to do something about it. And what I'm commonly seeing, and I saw in myself for a long time, and I see in other men I work with, is like then they have this era of like indecision. You know,
mm.
it's like they want to commit, but they're kind of afraid of like making the wrong choice, or sometimes there's some underlying stuff about not being good enough. Like,
Mhm.
what do you see kind of at play in this kind of indecision stage?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I loved everything you shared around, especially just that hypervigilance that we develop in the dating arena, where we're always on edge. You know, what does she mean when she says that? What does she mean she wants to know where this is going 3 months from now? So I think that, to your question around where or what are these things that are unconscious, I think they're unconscious forces. I think a lot of it has to do with a lack of guidance early on in our lives. And I think what we see as situationships unfolding, becoming a normal thing where people are just in this like waiting room, unsure of what their relationship is, unsure of where they're going, this casual dating uh, phenomenon where people are, there's no commitment, there's no expectation of commitment. And I think that works for some people. But when we're talking about the men that do want to be committed, but don't really notice or don't really know why they can't really give themselves in the way that they want to, for me, I seen it as a lack of the guidance that would have been essentially given and granted to them by the father.
Mm,
So the father for me represents security, represents provision, represents guidance, and represents some form of like an embodiment of values and principles. And so when let's say for my experience, I didn't really have that. What I had was the other side. So the other side of that is what we would see as the patriarchal father. Patriarchal father doesn't create environments for you to discover who you are destined to be as a man. What the patriarchal father does is create an environment where you have to become who it wants you to be.
mm,
So that's what we see in our world today. We get a handwritten script. You have to follow this. And if you don't, you're outcasted, right? This is what we would see as the collective father, right? But this collective father is not very loving. It literally tells us if you don't follow this step by step, you don't subscribe to these models of success, then you will be outcasted. You will not see abundance. You will not have wealth. You will make no money. So you have to follow what we have assigned to you. Go to this school, stay there for 8 years. Then after that, apply to these jobs and then follow this system that we have in place for you to become who we want you to be. So this is an expression of the collective patriarchal father. But most men actually have a microcosm of that within their childhood, where the father is shaming the aspects of themselves that they're trying to explore and get to know and say, hey, what about this? Or, hey, I feel sad about this. Or, I'm noticing that there's some grief here. Or, I'm noticing I don't really want to become an entrepreneur the way you did, Dad. Like, I'm actually very curious about being a dancer or an artist. Oh, that's whack. There's a shaming that happens, right? And so when it comes to the lens of dating, then that patriarchal father then expresses itself in oftentimes misogynistic and sexist ways. Oftentimes because that's what the father was also indoctrinated into. So men grow up around fathers that were just men in their lives. For me, it was a big brother, right? That through positive reinforcement, train us to become lonely men. And what I mean by that is that when we're constantly being praised for belittling women, for objectifying women, for just using women to get our needs met and seeing them as objects, we become lonely men that have no relationship to nourishing connections that are really fulfilling, right? And so that trains something in us. So when it comes to the dating world, we don't know how to actually connect like our full selves, express our desires, express our needs within a relationship and create opportunities for that person to also meet those needs, but also to connect to our true self. And so if I don't know what those things are, because my father didn't really provide that level of guidance and that level of, hey, this is how you properly court a woman that you're interested in, right? That would have been a game changer for me, right? That would have been a game changer for me. Hey, commitment is a really powerful thing. When you dedicate and commit yourself to something, that's really beautiful, son. I didn't really get that, right? So what happens is now I'm trying to make sense of relationships and dating. But when I don't receive proper fathering from my father, what happens is I'm raised by the culture then. So what does the culture say about dating? What does the culture say about commitment? What does the cult of masculinity say you're supposed to be doing when you're in relationship and you're 25 and you've just made your first six figures or you have a nice car? What does the cult of masculinity say you're supposed to be doing then? It might say you're not supposed to be getting married. You're supposed to be exploring your options, right? So that is what I become raised by. And then I internalize that as my way of relating to the world. So for me, these are the unseen forces that make up how men are showing up in their lives. And a lot of it comes back to our relationship to the father, to the model of masculinity that we have received and the ones that we've lacked throughout our lives. Um, so yeah, I think that's a big root of it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I love what you said there. Like, it's almost like we don't get a real father a mature father who's able to um instill in us confidence in our choices and decisions and the way that we want to be and like the things that inspire us and are interesting to us. So like say you love ballet and you say to your father, hey, I love ballet, and he goes, awesome, like I'm going to support you in
Yeah.
learning more about that ballet and developing your devotion to that ballet and that love to that ballet and getting into that. Instead, what we receive is don't do that, do this other things. This is the playbook you have to follow. And anytime we stray from that, as you said, we're kind of shamed. And I kind of hear in there, it teaches kind of young men to not trust their own kind of desires for what we want, or to learn how to like tap into like, I want to make this choice, I want to make this decision, I'm going to follow this through, which creates armies of young men who are following the playbook. But when they start to try and maybe follow the things they want, they're filled with indecision because they haven't regularly had this process of going, I'm going to trust my own intuition, gut, or desire, or soul's calling. Because when they put in that situation, they're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. How do I decide what's the right thing to do? Because I'm not used to making my own choices and decisions. I'm used to just following the playbook that the cultural patriarchy father has landed on me, or the emptiness of any father has kind of pushed on me.
Wow. That was so beautiful, David. I loved everything that you shared in that. And that's been at the root of my experience and at the root of a lot of men that I work with is it comes down to a lack of self-trust. The indecisiveness when it comes to dating, should I explore this connection? Is she asking too much for me? Or am I not giving more of myself than I can be in this connection. All of these scenarios that I'm bouncing between, these crossroads that I feel that I'm at when it comes to marriage, commitment, dating, partnership, all of these things are oftentimes a deep reflection of a lack of self-trust. And what we're talking about within these unseen forces, especially the patriarchal father, the system that we exist in, it literally is designed to alienate us from our intuition, to alienate us from our soul's calling, to make sure that we don't trust our own instincts to make decisions, to create something, to lean towards something, to step away, to walk away from something. We don't trust that. And so what happens is we rely on the external. We rely on the father, the patriarchal father, to tell us what to do. So it's a perfectly designed system for a system that wants to perpetuate itself and it doesn't care about our needs and our interests. But this is where we're at. This is where we're at. We don't have those, we haven't built those building blocks of self-trust. And those building blocks begin with getting a better understanding of what are my needs, right? I have to understand, again, it was really hard for me. I think a lot of the reason why a lot of the issues I had in relationships, especially, was I didn't have a clear understanding of what my needs were. I didn't really know what I needed in relationships. Like, I was just like, well, I mean, she's cute, great. And this is for most men, right? She's cute. She's nice. She doesn't call me all the time. I think I think I found my wife, right? Like, and that's just about it, right? And she sometimes cooks for me, or she can cook for me, or, um, she has a great Instagram profile, and that's about it. Oftentimes, when you literally sit down with a man and ask him, like, what about this woman has you feeling like this is something that you really want to dedicate and give yourself to? Most men can't give you a clear breakdown beyond the superficial realm. They can't. They'll talk about the looks, they'll talk about the mutual interest, and that's simply about it, outside of also maybe sexual pleasure. And maybe she, is great in bed, or they have really passionate chemistry. That's just about it. But when you want to get into the heart of what actually shapes a powerful, loving connection, like, are your values aligned? Do you guys have a shared vision? Do your goals align? Do you feel safe with this person? Do you feel that this person is genuinely kind? Does your inner child feel safe with them? Like, all of these things, and we can go deeper, but most men are like, what are you talking about? What does that matter? Like, that doesn't really matter, right? And so again, there's the cultural conditioning.
Mm.
Because if I start to consider this in partnership, then am I now challenging what it means to be masculine then? Because all of these things I've been told are reserved for the feminine to be thinking and contemplating about, right? Emotional safety, emotional intimacy, emotional closeness, nourishing relationships. That's what they need to be thinking about, right? Not me. So in this, this idea is literally keeping me away from getting in touch with what my needs are. And the needs, understanding our needs is a big component of creating healthy, empowering relationships and thriving in love. Because then I can literally begin to start to qualify the people in my life based on how they meet my needs, but based on also how open they are to collaborating, negotiating, and connecting with me at a deep level. But I can't even begin there because I'm alienated from this internal world because I believe that this is something that I'm not supposed to be connecting to because I'm a man, right? And that's not very masculine of me. Would it be?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you really took it to, like, as you were saying there, it's like there's a battle that goes on in the man. It's like, oh, I've a woman in front of me and I like her and she's sexy and she's good looking.
Mm.
And he's feeling like, especially if a man starts to go on that journey of like opening up and seeing that he wants something a bit deeper, it
Mm.
keeps kind of hitting the roadblocks of like, oh, like what else? What do I actually need? And I don't know how to figure out what I need. And oh
Mhm.
wait, I want safety. Like, and there's this almost uncomfortability with even saying the word like, oh, safety. I want a woman who can maybe listen to my feelings and emotions, because they're still battling this internalized kind of patriarchal father that they've been instilled with, and they're
Yeah.
almost in this continual internal battle over what's they kind of need in a relationship and they want for a relationship versus what they've been told for many years in their life that's kind of inside them, that's also battling with that idea. And that's the men who are kind of start to go on the journey to even
Mhm.
um create and have a relationship that has more depth.
Yeah. 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 I mean, our relationships become very, very superficial, and it creates that indecisiveness, right? Because we're like, well, she's doing all of the things, quote unquote, based on this playbook, right? Based on
Mm.
the playbook. She has all of the things, but there's a part of me that just doesn't, I don't know, right?
Mm.
And that happens to a lot of men. Happens to a lot of men. I've worked with many men that are just like, well, I mean, based off of on paper, this is something that I should be really excited about. I should be thrilled about connecting with her. I shouldn't even be contemplating leaving this relationship. These are things that happen inside of the male psyche, but they're so alienated from their emotional needs and their inner landscape that they can't connect to the part of them that's saying, no, 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 I can't trust this person with my heart. I can't lean into this connection the way that I want to because a lot of my emotional needs aren't being met here. And so that disconnection alienates us not only from our capacity to trust ourselves, to trust our instincts, to trust our gut, and to know what our needs are, but also alienates us from actually creating and maintaining healthy relationships.
Mm. And then the kind of flip side of that for these men is that they are in a relationship and they're not sure why. They're like, oh, I'm not sure if this is right. And
Mm,
they're waiting for a feeling. They're waiting for something to give them a sign that it's the right thing, because they're feeling a level of fear and they don't have the
mm,
self trust in themselves and their capacity to create the relationship they want. And
mm,
because they don't trust themselves to create the relationship they want, they're left in this state of like, oh, I'm not sure if this relationship is right. When really what's at play is they're not sure if they have the skills and capacity to make the relationship into what they really want it to be, but they're
mm,
unsure of the kind of the
mm.
discernment between those. They just know they're feeling a feeling that feels uneasy.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And like you said, there's not the skill sets that we would feel that will support us in navigating these fears, because I think a lot of them are natural, and I have them with work, I have them with love, I have them with family. Natural fears that come up, fears of you know commitment, anxiety around am I making the right decision or not. Those things I feel are natural and can come up at any given point in our lives. But if we don't have the skill sets to identify what's happening, to name what's happening, to feel what's happening, and to also uh, go beyond our internal dilemma, our internal struggle, and enter into a plane of clarity, a place where we can even ask for support at times, right? A place where we can even uh, find resources to support us with what we're navigating. I mean, we're going to make decisions that we're going to look back on and just wait, why did I do that? You know?
Mm, mm. And I guess it's like it's really my sphere recently. I've had a number of clients I'm working with and men in my group programs who have like started relationships. They're anything from like a few months into a year in, they suddenly start feeling this like, oh, I'm not sure, is this right? Is this wrong? There's a panic that sets in, there's a distancing that happens. Um, and they just sit in this state of limbo of like, oh, I don't know what to do. They're being hot and cold with the women. They don't realize because they're very much wrapped up in their emotional experience of like, I don't know what to do. I'm confused. Is this right? Is this wrong? And they're kind of slowly and unconsciously breaking the relationship down. It's like a death by a thousand cuts because they're not showing up, they're not communicating, and they're not even able to kind of communicate to their partner in a way that their partner can really hold to say, hey, Like I'm having stuff going on in my mind, but I know that this isn't the truth of really how I feel, but I don't know how to move forward, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. The communication part is a big aspect to it, and we don't have the tools to communicate our needs, because it's one thing to understand them, it's one thing to identify them, it's one thing to even conceptualize them and feel them, but it's a whole nother thing to articulate them, and a whole nother thing to articulate them in a healthy manner, without projection, without blame, without shaming the other person, without making the other person wrong in the matter, or without creating stories about who the person is and why they did that. That is a whole other skill set. And I think, like we were saying, it begins with getting in touch with that, creating spaces in our lives where we can find support. Like men's groups, I think for me have been tremendously powerful, um, because even if I didn't have the language, I mean, listening to other people, finding the language, and I'm connecting to that place in myself that also feels what they're sharing. So I think men's group have helped me with that, and I think the men, one of the biggest things we can do for ourselves when we feel that confusion is to lean into brotherhood, people that we feel we can trust with an aspect of our struggles, an aspect of our story, an aspect of our pain, and create opportunities for us to feel seen in that way, to feel validated in our pain, but also get support with what the hell is going on with us.
Mm, yeah, it's been such a valuable resource to me being in men's programs, in men's groups. I run a men's circle for a company as well. It's just, and I spoke to, even before we got on the call, I spoke to one of my clients, and an old client who's recently come back, and he said he started going to a men's circle. And he said he had this experience. He's like, every time I'm going, I have resistance to going. I'm like, I don't want to go. I've got other things to do. I've got work I should be doing. And he goes, and I sit down and I hear other people talking. And he's like, I start to see some of their struggles in my life. And it helps me bring awareness to, like, God, I didn't actually, someone might be talking about their mother, for example. And it makes us kind of hold a mirror up and go, how is my relationship with my mother? Like, how am I treating my mother? Like,
Mhm.
oh, does do I hold good boundaries with my mother? And then it'll move on to the next man, and then he's talking about his experience, and it causes us to have to think about that man, but also think about our. It's like we experience his experience through ourselves by just listening to it.
Yeah, I resonate with that, and yeah, in my own experience, I've had similar reflections in participating and facilitating men's groups. Um, yeah, I think it's such a powerful catalyst to healing, but also like self discovery. You know.
Mm, mm. I want to change the direction a little bit, as because this morning I was reading an Instagram post by someone, and it was talking about vulnerability in men, and men are being called forward to vulnerability more and more. And I was also reflecting on an experience I had at a conference I was at a couple of days ago about masculinity as a student in the workplace. And the reason why this comes to my mind is that it was two things that were said very quickly. Is like someone was expressed some distaste at emotional dumping. But vulnerability for men is okay. But if it's emotionally dumping, that's a whole different thing. And there's like a disgust at that. And I'd love to get your take on kind of first what vulnerability is versus emotional dumping,
Mm,
and kind of why, if this is an experience you've had, like I have an experience that men really fear being vulnerable because they fear that they're emotionally dumping and they don't want
mm.
to stray into that sort of territory.
Yeah, yeah. I think vulnerability is it's a powerful it's a powerful way of allowing ourselves to be seen. And I also believe it is an art. So, meaning that just like anything, too much of something is too much of it, right? With water, I can drink too much water and that could go from a nutrient to a very, it can be poisonous to my body. Same thing with oxygen, right? I can't hold too much oxygen in my body, holding my breath. I'm just taking in, taking in, taking in. I mean, I might pass out. So I think it's the same with pretty much even these beautiful things like moments of vulnerability. If I overdose on vulnerability, that's where I enter into that terrain of emotional dumping. If I give too little, right? Too little is also just as, you can see as just as negative or harmful as too much of it, right? Which is sometimes what I find, because we don't have the skill sets, we don't understand our needs, we toggle between both of these extremes. Mm-hmm. So I'm giving too little, right? I'm just, hey, how are you doing today? Fine. Today was a little stressful. That's about it, right? Wait, what's going on? What happened? I can't even go beyond that point. And then you have the other extreme where you're just, okay, today was stressful, and you're just sharing every single detail and pain and even sometimes trauma as well. And so I think these that's why I believe it is an art to be able to communicate what's happening in my inner world, but to also be mindful of that I'm with a whole other person, a whole other human being who has limitations, capacities, and also their own things that they're navigating on their personal journey. To share, quote unquote, too much, right? When I lean into that place of emotional dumping, is because I've completely lost sight of the person in front of me, right? I've completely lost sight of them. I'm completely in my internal experience, and I'm just sharing that. And oftentimes that's all I really, I'm concerned about. And for many things, that could be, this is the first time I'm being heard, right? So I want to normalize that for men. Like, at times it is like I said, it's an art. So it's going to take time. It's going to take practice to really develop that skill to communicate vulnerably in ways that are healthy and in ways that help us still remain centered and grounded and connected to the person we're speaking with. So in the beginning stages, you might find yourself, it's very normal to be overly excited because somebody has actually created a safe space for you to say, hey, I'm curious, what is going on? I love you so much. I didn't know you were stressed about this. Can you share with me what's going on? You may have never, for most men, nobody has ever kind of created that space for them, right? Even in hosting men's circles, guys, I create room for that part of them that has to recalibrate to the fact that somebody is not only interested and curious about what's happening within their world, but they also have a space to communicate what's happening in their world. There's a part of them that has to literally recalibrate to that. The safety of that and the possibility of emotional intimacy that's unfolding in that moment. And so I might, in that moment, and I've seen a lot of men, even in my own experience, I'm excited, I'm sharing maybe too much at that moment. I'm like, wait, okay, let me pull back, right? So it's very normal because we're developing the art, we're developing the skill of communicating our emotions vulnerably from a place that's centered and grounded. It's not easy. Nobody gives us a template for this. No, very rare models in our own childhood of what this looked like, right? So just normalizing that helps, I think, removes the shame aspect of it. So I feel a lot of men that try to do these things are often shamed internally, right? And they retreat back into those old coping mechanisms of like, see, I shouldn't have said anything. Fuck, I did it again. I was too much in the room. I was too intense. Oh my God. And, and they actually may never share again. And sometimes that happens externally as well with the person that they're around. Maybe they're in a men's group and the guy was like, man, you shared a little too much, bro. It's like, whoa, like that. It's a tool of shame that does not support men that have never had spaces to really bring these parts of themselves into a room. And so I feel that the people in our lives, the people in these men's lives, have to keep that in mind. I have to keep that in mind, that you have to create windows of opportunity for these men to recalibrate to the fact that emotional intimacy is not a foreign concept. It is a lived experience that they can have and share with other people in their lives. So I think that is something that men can play with, can navigate, can learn in men's circles. And I think in those spaces, we get to try these things out, right? Because as men, most often we can hold that, right? We can hold that. And so through that practice continually with other men sharing, we start to fine tune our formula for articulating our needs, our boundaries, what's happening inside of our world. And I think from that place, now we enter and can invite the feminine into that communication where it's like, oh my God, I got a lot of that excess shit out and a lot of that the deep thickness of it out with my brothers and with people that I trust. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's my journal, right? Maybe it's just my journal. Maybe I don't have these brothers in my life yet, but I have my fucking journal. I have my notes app. I have my voice memo, right? And I get all of it out. Maybe I have a therapist, but I get all of it out. And so now the excess, the more thick layers of what I'm processing are a little more stabilized, right? And then now if I'm in partnership or I'm married or I'm dating somebody and there's something I need to communicate, or I'm just in a relationship that I really value, right? Connection. It could be with my best friend. I'm more grounded enough to communicate from a place that is vulnerable, but is also still grounded and still centered and allows me to keep sight of who is in front of me.
Mm, mm. I love that because, like, I'm hearing we use these different spaces, these different people in our life, these different groups to practice vulnerability as a
Mm,
practice. You know, it's something we have to practice, especially if we are men who have come from the school of, you know, not feeling, not expressing, not knowing our needs. It becomes a practice to go to spaces, go to a men's group where the impact of our vulnerability is, say, lower than in, say, a relationship or even in a friendship, because inside of a
mm,
relationship, our vulnerability could be, our partner might give it meaning about them or the relationship. So where we're in a men's group, for instance, or with our therapist, we can just almost in a way that is like, we can just regurgitate the story, how it
mm,
feels, like all the bits we're not even sure about. Like, oh, I think I'm feeling this, and I think this happened, and these are my thoughts. We can kind of just like vomit it out with someone like that, or
mm,
in a place like that, potentially, if we got permission.
yeah,
As used as like a processing place to then maybe bring to our partner intimate relationship or even a friendship in a way that it's more, like you said, stabilized and refined, so that
mm,
we can give them the essence of what's there, or the kind of
mm,
important part of our experience, of our feelings and emotions, knowing that we've had a space to process it, and we're bringing it now in a way that's like not necessarily even a nice little bow on it, because I keep thinking of this like little package with a bow on it, not so much like that, but in a way that like, and we're going to mention John earlier, and I had him on the podcast not too long ago, and he said it's like giving it to someone in a way that they can metabolize, that they can kind of digest and
for
chew on and
sure.
take in.
Mm,
And I think this is where maybe a lot of men struggle, because they don't have these different spaces and different people to go to. They may only
mm,
have a partner that they speak
mm,
to. So whenever they are opening up about, that person is a person they go to and kind of regurgitate the whole story and all the finer details and all the emotions. So that
mm,
person, if they don't have the capacity or the level of self-awareness to hear it as it is, or hear it in a way that they can sift through it or
mm,
not take it personally, that creates an environment where that vulnerability is going to be met with, you know, whatever reactivity that partner has, or the maxing out of their capacity as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it like in the heat of the moment, especially when men are in partnership, it's like a fucking math equation. It's like a calculus. You're in a calculus class all over again. You got to get the precise measurements to make sure the whole thing works out, to make sure the person isn't super triggered. They don't react. They don't think it's about them. It's more about you and what's going on with yourself. Just want to communicate that. Um, it's a fucking math equation, man, and it can be overwhelming, and it can be overwhelming. So, I think I think that's even more reason why we need to create spaces in our lives where we get to practice these things, where we get to inform ourselves and feel and connect with models, right?
Mm.
What are the models we have in our lives where we can feel, wait, there's some powerful, beautiful communication happening here that I feel is vulnerable, but also very grounded and also very stable as well. And so I think those reference points, those models, help us get a better understanding of what it is that we want to create and how it is we want to communicate. Because our expression of our vulnerability isn't going to look like what everyone else's looks like, right?
Mm.
There's going to be our own way of bringing that forward. And sometimes for somebody else, that would be like, you just shared too little.
Mm.
And for me, based on my nervous system, based on my capacities, that was very grounded. That was everything that I could communicate from a grounded and centered place. And for another man, that may look like too much, right? So using the reference points to also discover what is our formula, right? What does the art of vulnerability look like when it's expressed to our unique energy, our unique expression of masculinity, and also given the unique circumstances of our unique relationship, right? And our partner, whoever we're interfacing and connecting with, there's so much of that is, and we can't rely on external authorities of, um, what is good, what is bad, what is wrong, what is right, what is red flag, what is green flag. All of these can be reference points, but we always have to come back to, if we want to cultivate self-trust, it's, I'm the authority here and I can use these as maps and guides, but they're not dictating the path. They're not dictating my communication. And I have to always come back to myself and ask me, how does this feel for me? How does it feel when I connected and shared that with that person? And I think that's what matters most, and remembering, I may have felt connected and stabilized and grounded when I communicated that, and they still reacted, right?
Mm.
And not making that about me, but honoring what I can control and also recognizing what is also outside of my control. Right.
Mm. Mm. It just it makes me think, and I know this is not so much when I say this and hear you say all this, it's like, man, there's so much complexity to being vulnerability and expressing vulnerability. Like, it's almost like we are setting ourselves up for, and I say this in kind of like air quotes, failure, because we're expecting that it should, if we've done it right, again, air quotes again, then it should be
Mm-hmm.
responded to in a certain way, and we should always feel this certain way. And if we don't, that doesn't happen, then we've done something wrong. But actually, like,
Exactly.
what I'm hearing is there's so much complexity to it that we may express ourselves wonderfully, and articulate in the moment, but the person that we're with just can't hold that information, or vice
Yeah.
versa, that what feels good for us in that moment may be ungrounded to the rest of the people that we are with. There's so much complexity to the this piece of
Yeah.
being vulnerable, and we shouldn't really
Yeah.
expect ourselves to like be getting it like quote unquote right.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's so much. And that's why I love the practice and the art of it, is because it helps us form a relationship to our own bodies. Because if I'm always checking in on what feels good for me, what felt most authentic and sincere for me to express, to embody in a given moment, then I create a bridge to my intuition, to my own heart, right?
Mm.
I'm no longer depending, right? We can use the external world as, like I said earlier, guides and toolkits and things like that, but I'm not dependent on it, right? I'm not also dependent on people's reaction, positive or negative, to inform me whether what I did was good, what I did was grounded, what I did was masculine or manly. I've set myself free to be misperceived, to be misunderstood, to even be painted as a villain in somebody else's story. That's freedom.
Mm.
And that freedom comes from me trusting myself, being in touch, being intimate with my inner world, knowing that, hey, I am here for me. I am acknowledging these parts of myself. I am taking big leaps of courage and faith in ways that I never imagined myself to do before. And I can't help but to celebrate that. And
Mm.
whether this person can see that, whether this person can recognize that, whether this person can meet me there or not, isn't going to lead me to abandon myself, isn't going to lead me to abandon this fact, right? It's not. And if they can meet me there, great. That's going to be a compliment to my experience, but it's not going to be the whole fucking Sunday. It's not going to be what makes the experience great, right? It's that validation, that inner validation, that I'm the instrument of my own validation. I've become that, right? As a man in my life, I've become that. And I am excited about the people that can support me in continuing to nurture that. And the ones that don't, the ones that can't meet me there based on their own personal journey and experiences, I, as a man, I think as men, we have to understand this. I'm being confronted with my limitations. As men, we forget we have limitations, meaning that I can't control what happens in someone else's body as they process the expression of my truth, the expression of my true self. I cannot control that. There's a part of me that will try to control it. That's why this might feel like a math equation. This is why it might feel so overwhelming, is because I think as a man, I've been given all of the tools to create a perfect world, to create a perfect moment. I can't determine what happens for them. I can only determine how I experience it. And so giving up, resigning that responsibility to stretch people's limitations, to expand their capacities, to help them feel me as a good, genuine man. I can't control that. I can only control what I'm doing, my intentions, my communication, the tone, my delivery. I can control that. These are the things that are within my control. And I think it's a courageous thing, and it's very tough. I know in my own journey, it's very hard to admit the limitations of the masculine spirit, the edge of what it means to be a man. I can't go beyond that. I can't control that. And I have to let that go. The desire to control that. I have to let that go. I have to let that go. And if I do, there's freedom on the other side. There's freedom there.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I was just like really feeling what you said about like letting go of the control of other people, because it's almost like I'm almost like hearing some of my clients in my head as people talk to me on my podcast, like because they're like, oh, I was vulnerable, I was open, and she just didn't, she left me, or she didn't think I was man enough, you know.
Mm.
And I'm kind of like in what you've said there and before, is like we can learn to sharpen our sword, and maybe in a men's circle who are talking to us about our delivery and how what we're saying, like recalibrating us. So we like, actually,
Yeah.
you think you're sharing like in a way that like really lands, and actually you're just monologuing to us, and it doesn't feel like I really feel like what you're actually saying, or you're waffling, you're like running around the edges, you're not getting to the point. So we use that as a
Mhm.
space to like sharpen our sword until we can be like, actually, yeah, I hear that, I can feel that, and we start to get this self-trust again in what we're saying.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
taking that also simultaneously into the world, and expressing and letting go of the need to say, have the response come back as we think it should be, have our partner say when we express our vulnerability, then be like, oh my God, I'm so grateful for hearing that. And maybe instead
Mhm.
they kind of see us as maybe like through their own kind of internalized patriarchy, they think that we're weak or less than a man. And like I'm hearing
Mhm.
you say, there's like that part of us, that masculine part of us that wants to influence everything, control everything, has to let go of like,
Right.
I can't control this woman in front of me. I feel confident and a self-trust in who I'm showing up as. And
Mhm.
obviously she doesn't have the capacity or the desire or the will or the ability to like hold me and my expression. And that for her
Mhm.
lands as something different from my intention and from, the way I've expressed it and my feeling. And that's okay. I haven't meant to
Mhm.
cause any offense, but they can't, take that, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me instantly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a powerful. It's tough. It's tough. It's not easy, but I think it offers us the freedom to be ourselves,
Mm,
which is what most men don't feel. Right?
mm,
We are being people that are going to be worthy of other people's approval, respect, validation, and even affection. Right? That's who we are pursuing. That's the version of ourselves we're pursuing. Right? When I'm trying to be more masculine, whose approval is at the end of that game?
mm,
Right? Whose approval is at the end of that game? Is it mine? Because based on my own personal life, this feels very masculine.
mm,
Who I am, who I've become feels someone that I'm very fucking proud of.
mm,
So why do I feel that I'm not enough right now? That I need to be more, that I need to do more, that I need to do more masculine shit? Whose approval is at the end of that? So is what I'm calling self-improvement, doing the deep work, is that really what that is? Or is it just a practice of me gaining someone's approval,
mm,
me being worthy of love and affection in someone else's eyes? So most men, most humans really, do not have the freedom to be themselves. We don't have the freedom to be ourselves. So I think that recognition of not trying to control how others perceive us, how others receive our vulnerability, offers us a gateway towards that freedom. I can be here, I can stand as myself in the face of their discomfort, in the face of their rejection, in the face of their disapproval. I can stand as myself and remain true to myself, remain true to my values, and not abandon me, not abandon the little boy in here that's like, that was so big. I've never done that before. I didn't think I could express that. I've often been shamed when I did that, but I did it today. Like, I'm not going to abandon that little boy to maintain your approval, right?
mm,
And I think that is courageous. It's very, very courageous. But it's hard. It's tough.
mm. Definitely. Yeah. And mm, I I was on your page recently, and I saw you talking about something that made me really think, and I'd love to get more of your take on it. Is around this idea. There's a lot of conversation I'm seeing now from the polarity space of like men going, "Oh, I want a more feminine woman," you know, and there's also the other side of women going, "I want a masculine man." Like, we'll put that. Maybe we'll touch on that afterwards. But this desire for a feminine woman, and I
Mm,
wonder. My opinion is, and I'd love to know what yours is, your opinion, your thoughts, your experience. I think a lot of men are desiring a feminine woman who is open, who's soft, who is juicy, who is open, not because that's necessarily what they really need, right? Or
mm,
want, really, but because that what they want is a woman who is agreeable, a relationship, and they believe they want a relationship that's agreeable, easy, and doesn't kind of push them into sort of challenge or discomfort they don't want to face.
mm. Yeah, yeah, There's a lot to that. I definitely agree with. I feel that this image, if I were to just paint the image of the soft, sensual, juicy, soft, gentle, loving woman, if that's what I'm fixating on as my ideal woman, my ideal partner, where in myself do I then create room for the other expressions of her femininity then? Do I have capacity for that? Or is this the mold, this is the expression of femininity that I enjoy best because when it caters to me, it doesn't challenge me, it's agreeable, and it's more easy to control? Is my desire for this in the feminine really just a reflection of my limitations? Oftentimes, I feel that's what it is for most men. If I can hold the maiden, the sensual parts of her, the oracle, the mother, the dark mistress, the witch, the bruja, the wild aspects of her. This is a clear indication of my expansiveness, of the spaciousness inside of me. To not want to box somebody into being one thing, but I can hold a myriad of expressions of who they are and what they bring to my life, right? And oftentimes, the only reason I could be able to do that is because I offer that gift to myself. And so most men are very appealed and attracted to that one dimension of a woman because they've already boxed themselves into one dimension of themselves. Mm-hmm. I'm the protector, I'm the provider, I'm the stoic, I'm the grounded, I'm the rock. These other facets of my being that have that to it, but actually include other things. My openness, my sensuality, my freedom, my playfulness, my openness, my curiosity, my capacity to be emotionally caretaking, right? Not always the breadwinner, but the part of me that wants to be emotional caretaker, the nurturer, right? The child in me, the imaginative, creative little wizard in there, right? Those dimensions of myself, I've now suppressed, I've completely closed myself off to, and I've continuously tried to mutilate and disconnect from. When I enter partnerships with the feminine, who is a fucking ocean, and based off her seasons and based off her menstrual cycle, she could be a different woman all within 1 month, right? Now I'm relating to a being that has all of these aspects of themselves showing up very visibly, right? Very visibly. That's going to frighten the shit out of me. I'm not going to know what to do with that. I can't relate to that. I don't even know how to relate to those other dimensions of myself, the full spectrum of my humanity. How am I going to hold yours? How am I going to make space for yours? I won't. So I feel that a man's capacity to hold the full spectrum of a woman's feminine expression is reflective on their capacity to hold the full spectrum of their own humanity. And so when we do that, we have more space inside to create room for that. And that doesn't mean that we create room for disrespect. We create room for people being rude and belittling us. It means that we can hold a woman's expression, right? We can create space for it to feel safe, to be embodied. And of course, in a way that also allows us to feel respected, to feel seen, to feel loved, and all of those things. So oftentimes I see men go into that, but they go into it into the extreme, where it's like, oh, I have to make room for everything then. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to hold the different expressions of yourself and then extending that gift to the other people in your life. So I feel a lot of that wanting the feminine to be soft, to be nurturing, is also a reaction from being in a space where we saw the dark shadow expression of the feminine that can be very fierce, but can also be very controlling, can be very manipulative, and can also lead us to feel like we are less than, that we aren't good enough, right? And sometimes these expressions were embodied in our mother. Sometimes these expressions are embodied by the culture, right? By the women that we've dated. And so that can also restrict and limit a man's capacity, is these painful experiences of relating to those parts of a woman that are not regulated, that are not grounded, that are not healthy, right? We're talking about the unhealthy expression of it. That can also be like, hey, I don't even want to engage ever again with that, right? And the same can be for a woman. She may relate to the direct energy of a man's masculine energy, right? Where he's assertive, he can take control of a situation, he has some healthy aggression to him. And she could go and have an experience where that is completely unhealthy. That can lead her to be like, I don't want anyone with any type of aggression. I want my guy to be passive. I want him to be a nice guy, right? She could go to the other extreme, but it's shaped by these past experiences where that expression of these healthy qualities in a man are then over embodied to a point where they're very scary and frightening. So I think it happens for, I think all human beings when we are relating to these dimensions of masculinity and femininity, when they've expressed themselves in unhealthy ways, we develop a reaction
Mm.
to where we don't even want to contact anybody who has any ounce of that. So I think that's our work in unpacking those experiences so that we have more room to receive people that are that have those parts of them.
Mm. Yeah, powerful. And like I hear there, it's like we make more room inside of ourselves so we can touch those parts of ourselves. You know, for the men who are
Mhm.
looking for a soft, gentle, open woman, is to touch the parts of ourselves that are, instead of rejecting, bring those in and touch those,
Yeah.
so and then we can then be more in contact with that on the hour. As I often say to men, it's like you can't just do this work of becoming more and more masculine, because what will happen to you is that when you meet a feminine being, you won't be able to really connect with her, right? There's the polarity, but you also need to be able to connect with her because you haven't connected with the parts of yourself. When we can connect to
Mhm.
the parts of ourselves that are maybe soft and gentle and feminine, when we come
Yes.
into the wide range within a woman, a feminine partner, we are more skilled at being with those parts of ourselves, and our relationships become more harmonious. And like, instead
Mhm.
of, you know, like you said, the rejection, you know, we had a bad experience of aggression, for instance, and we think that all aggression is bad. It's
Mhm.
like, if we can touch our own aggression and do the work around that and how we view aggression and so forth, then we won't be so reactive to just seeing it and demonizing it as something bad, or just because it's an overinflated expression of, for example, aggression.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's powerful, but it takes a lot of self reflections to like, all right, where in myself is this happening, right?
Mm,
Where do I not have space for that in myself, in my own expression? And how could that free me to relate to people that may also be expressing things that I have disconnected from, that I've, told myself this is a no, this is a non-negotiable. I can't have a person that's aggressive. I can't have a person that is sensual. I can't have a woman that's wild.
mm,
That's too much. Or have any. She can't have any masculine qualities about her. Like, wait, what? How is that in accordance with the humanity of the full spectrum of our humanity? How that doesn't align with that? So yeah, I think it takes some examination, relationship to our own inner feminine as well. Like we mentioned throughout this conversation, the vulnerability, getting in touch with our emotional needs. These are all templates for cultivating a nurturing and empowering relationship with our own inner feminine,
mm,
right? And so if we have no relationship to that, of course, the external feminine is going to feel very fucking scary. It's going to feel frightening. It's going to feel too much. Any expression of it is going to feel overwhelming to our bodies, right? Because what is that indicating? What is that reflecting back to us? Our alienation from our own inner feminine.
mm. Yeah, it feels like this common thread that's gone through the whole conversation of that, and the self-trust as well being such
Mhm.
important elements of, for us men, especially especially men who lean towards, you know, the fear of commitment and maybe what people traditionally call kind of avoidance, is like bringing that in and
Mhm.
bringing that feeling, learning to trust our feelings and what feelings we can and should be trusting is a
Mhm.
lifelong practice.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I completely agree, man.
Mm. And I see the time is flying away. So we probably
Nice.
spin the conversation to a close there. I think we could talk about this weaving in out for hours. But it's been such a pleasure to have you on, brother. Such a pleasure. Like, it's been such an insightful conversation. Like, even I've got notes here that bits that we didn't quite get into. And I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can hear more of your wonderful wisdom and your beautiful words.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the conversation today, brother. Yeah, I really appreciated your shares. and also just learning more about your work and your experience with everything that we talked about today. So thank you for sharing and having me on. If anyone's interested in learning more about my work, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok as well, under the username @byermeas. So that's BYERMEAS. And from there, you can get updates on more things that I'll be sharing from group men's circles that I put together that happen every quarter, workshops that I put together, masterclasses, and also a paid community that we're developing right now. So so everything you'll find will be on my Instagram page for sure.
Awesome. And I'll put those all into the show notes for the listeners. And I'm sure, listeners, if you've taken something from this, maybe there's a particular insight that you got out of the episode that made you really think about yourself, how you've been showing up, or maybe how you've been showing up in a relationship. I'm sure the two of us would love to hear from you. You know, I always love to hear from listeners when they're like, "Oh, I heard this, you said this thing on this podcast. It really made me think." And it's always not so much for my own validation, partly because that's, as an Instagrammer, that's all I can live on is validation. But also to help people deepen that sometimes in conversation and to know what's really landing with people. It's always beautiful to hear. But as we come to a close, I'd love to thank Jeremiah. Thank you for today. Thank you for your wisdom, and guys, guests, and listeners. Ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. You know, it's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. You know, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them. You know, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.